Hello, New Zealand. It's good to be with you. And believe it or not, it's not just Simon and some other person and Bob and some other person. We've actually coordinated our times. And Simon, good to have you back.
It's nice to be back. In fact, you can't see on camera, but there's a few people around my house at the moment doing some work on the gas. There's a whole lot of gas changes. So if all of a sudden
Okay.
my screen goes very bright and I disappear, you know what's happened.
Okay. Well, I am on the road as well. So that means that unfortunately we can't access the comments being made. So look, if you want to comment on our YouTube channel, on our Facebook page, Family First, you go right ahead, have some discussion with others that are watching. It's just that I can't pull them in and have a chuckle along and a discussion with you as well. So sorry about that, but that's okay. Simon and me will rant on anyway for the next 45 minutes. I'm sure we can do that, eh, Simon?
Easy, easy. And in
Yeah.
fact, I'll make sure I jump on afterwards and actually look and read the comments. It's always
Yeah.
good to have them.
Okay, and obviously we're going into a long weekend, so yeah, that's all very exciting. It's a very exciting day. Thursday being the end of the week. I love it. Now, the image of the week, and I did see this, and did the rounds, and everybody was having a very good chuckle, and it's this lovely couple, and she says, he started believing things that I knew weren't true. At first, I feared it was Alzheimer's, and then I realised he was watching One News. And yeah, everybody did have a little chuckle at that. It is interesting just in general discussions. I know this is political playback, but of course they're pushing a lot of the political narrative. I actually call the media a political party. I believe that we should call them the media party because they're pushing a political narrative that generally favours one side, generally. But it's interesting that just the level of trust, Simon, is just tanking. I don't find many people really complimenting and saying, hey, 6 o'clock news is a must watch anymore.
No, and I mean, part of it is the bias that you're talking about. The other is that we can source news much quicker from elsewhere. Look, it doesn't matter if it's Family First shows like this or the platform or RCR or X, of course. They're becoming redundant. I mean, both figuratively and for a lot of them, literally.
Yeah. Okay, let's get straight into it and let's check out some polls. So I think you might have touched on one or two of these with Brendan last week, but not this one because it only just came out, well, it was published last night. This is the Freshwater. So the old Dominion Post, which is now just called the Post, they have started up their new measurement. And let me just enlarge that. So you can see the Labour Party, that's quite dramatic. The Labour Party has gone up 7. And National have gone down 6. Green Party down 1. New Zealand First up 2. Gee, I don't know. I'm actually just looking at that, Simon. I am not quite sure that that would be correct. Do you think National's got a hiding in the last week or two?
No, short answer is no. That it's too big a move for both National and Labour in opposite directions. I'm just looking at it with you here. I mean, every other poll that we've been looking at, look, there is a trajectory of
nudge.
National and Labour. Yeah, but they normally a percent or two here or there, and I can't think of anything. Even the budget hasn't been particularly good for the government, but it hasn't been that bad. That's quite a big shift, which I don't quite believe.
And that's
But,
outside
what we
the
do know,
margin of
Bob,
error as well. That's the interesting thing. I mean, if it's usually you say if it's between 2 to 3 to 4%, could be margin of error, but this is outside the margin of an error.
it is, and yeah, I can't explain it other than I think it's probably a dodgy poll. It doesn't quite sit, but we can still take away that National and Labour are exceptionally close, and on this current trajectory, next year's election is going to be about the minor parties. And interesting to see New Zealand First continuing to grow, for example, because actually, generally speaking, Bob, smaller parties in government suffer. They go down. New Zealand First is going up. So look, this is it's still going to be fascinating.
Okay, let's just look at the leadership. And once again, bit of a drop for Christopher Luxon and Chris Hipkins. Gosh, they've called him Christopher Hipkins. That's interesting. I've never heard him called Christopher. Look, the reason I think that this is slightly out of their poll is because they also asked this question. do you feel things in New Zealand are headed in the right direction? Now, the right direction has increased, and the wrong direction, the red line, so the wrong direction is the red line. I mean, that decreased in the first year of the government, and it's held its own. So that would suggest that New Zealanders are pretty happy. I mean, is that your summation?
Yeah, long and short, yes. In fact, this is the question that, as a politician, you're most interested in. Obviously, you want to know your party's vote and so forth. But, by and large, if people think the country is going in the wrong direction, you as the government are in trouble. And, we knew before the last election, the majority of Kiwis felt the country was going in the wrong direction, which doesn't mean and didn't mean actually a thumping victory for the centre-right, but enough. I mean, it's still concerning that so many people still feel the country's going in the wrong direction. I know the government would like that to change, but you're right too. It's relatively stable. People aren't feeling like they're going backwards. Maybe that's the most optimistic thing we can say.
Yeah, exactly. And look at the massive gap there was when the government, just before the new government came in. Massive gap. They've closed the gap. Now, look, one other poll, Courier Market Research, which was the week before, and this is the major voting issues. The further down, the more major. Let me enlarge that. As you can see, cost of living was number one. It's gone to number two, and number one is economy. I mean, those are both the same things to me, really. And then number three is health. And we've already identified health as being a bit of an Achilles heel for the government. Interestingly there, law and order seems to be under control. Poverty seems to be under control. Education, environment, and the treaty. So media won't be too happy with this one, but we've identified already that there is concerns around the economy and there is concerns around health, isn't there?
There is, and understandably so. Laying my cards on the table, I am concerned about the economy. Things aren't ticking over as well as we would like. As you've heard me say before, even under this government, we continue to spend more, we have bigger debt, and, look at the global environment at the moment. It is very unstable. New Zealand is in no position to absorb any shocks that could come its way. And health, even though I think Simeon Brown's doing as best he can, health is just such a behemoth. And if I'm mixing my metaphors all of a sudden, it's like squeezing a balloon. You can squeeze and try to fix one area, and all that happens is it burgeons out somewhere else, and it's just so difficult. But, it's why it's up there. And finally, the law and order. I think if you were Mark Mitchell, you'd be feeling quite relieved that actually it's not being perceived as the big issue. And, it's probably one of the government's stronger areas at the moment for being seen to do something.
Yeah. Okay, interesting metaphor. The metaphor I would use is trying to put pajamas on an octopus. You get one arm in and another arm slips out, and you get the other arm in and another one slips out. But anyway, the balloon one's a good one as well.
We should have a vote sometime, like a poll. Whose metaphor does people squeeze balloons or pajamas and octopus?
Yeah, octopus in a pajama. Actually, people can make a comment on that, and we will check it out. One other poll that I just wanted to run by you. And that is this one, also part of Courier Market Research, and they asked, who do the farmers vote for? As you can see, national disproportionately high compared to their national vote. ACT as well, New Zealand First, and of course, farmers don't want to go anywhere near the Greens. Labour, I mean, 3%, that's a shocker. Te Pāti Māori and unsure. I mean, you wouldn't be surprised to that, would you? I mean, the farmers, why would they support a left-wing party who basically thinks that cows farting is a major environmental issue?
Yeah, I mean, look, National is in many ways a rural party. I mean, maybe it's the better way to say it. It's the foundational vote for National, so it doesn't surprise me. But I would note the fact that ACT's about to take a fifth of the vote, that would and should worry National. I mean, ACT over time, both around gun reform and around climate change, have been eaten into National's vote. And so on the positive side of the coin, that centre-right vote is, 73%. That's pretty encouraging. But for National itself, having its vote just slowly eaten away is one of the reasons why it sort of lingers in the low to mid-30s.
Yeah. Okay. All right, let's have a look at our next topic, and that is the census. And so the announcement yesterday that apparently we're not going to do a census. To be honest, I'm of two minds, because partly I think the census is really important, although I really did object to the fact that I was told that my gender was different to my sex in the last census. So I thought, okay, they've just become activists. And then when I had to figure out what my sexuality was, that really confused me. So maybe that's why people can't fill it in, because I can't answer these two questions. But the acting Stats NZ chief executive and the government statistician said that part of the reason was due to rising costs, declining survey response rates, and disruption from events like Cyclone Gabriel in 2023. Now, just going backwards, to me, saying that we should stop doing censuses because there might be a cyclone is just the dumbest statement I've ever heard. But then the other one, declining survey response rates, well, maybe we should do something about the response. Maybe there should be some legal impetus, consequence of not filling in the census. How hard is it to do this? And part of me thinks this is quite important and we shouldn't be dropping it. What say you?
Look, I'm the same. I'm a little nervous about this dropping. I think you're right to identify some of the woke and ideologically driven questions, but the majority are helpful and useful. I understand, if there's declining rates of people engaging, well, it actually behoves government to work to increase that. But I suppose my major concern is if they're going to source data from elsewhere, then partly how's that been selected? But I think you may see more invasive questions coming from other government agencies as they attempt to fill the hole. In other words, you're going to be forced one way or another to provide information to now a whole array of government departments, which potentially, Bob, doesn't have that same accountability that the census itself does. So a very long way of saying they're going to extract the data from somewhere and expect to see more invasive questioning now from other government departments, be that health, education, police, wherever.
And of course, are they going to release it? I see that was a concern about whether certain agencies, for example, health agencies, are going to release data that may be private. I was just Googling while you were talking how many people completed the census. So it was 3.4 million, because I was just thinking, look, we had a compulsory vaccination thing virtually, a mandated vaccination if you wanted to live. And that got up to 90%. So I'd hate us to see us go down that track, but maybe we just have to persuade people about the goodwill of what the census is about. And maybe we also need to make it a bit more user-friendly, online. I'm just sorry they're ditching it. I think we're going to lose out on some important stats that I actually use, and I was using it the weekend presenting the state of the family in New Zealand because of the census data. So it has got value.
It does. And I worry, and you've touched on this, but I'll probably put it in different words. There's not going to be as much transparency and accountability, because you're right. We can jump onto Stats New Zealand at the moment and just directly access and engage the census data. Now, arguably, census will collate everything, but I could imagine it remaining in different silos. Oh, that's health's information. Oh, that's MSD's information. And so for you and I and other researchers and advocates, it's going to be hard to actually interrogate. And, maybe that's partly what the government wants, but I think we're losing a very useful and convenient tool to save a few dollars.
Yeah. Okay, next topic is this disturbing one that was in Radio New Zealand last week. Did you and Brendan touch on this on Thursday? Do you remember last Thursday?
We did. We did. Brendan was great, I have to say. Simon, speaking in the third person, less so.
There was obviously a lot of coverage, and of course, for those who aren't aware, and we've actually done a blog on it, looking at it in detail, but basically you've got a young girl who around 12, 13 is struggling with anorexia, also has OCD, also has autism, also diagnosed with childhood trauma from sexual abuse, and then learns about gender ideology at school and decides wants to identify as a male. And the family say that then meant that all the agencies looking after her were focused on affirming her gender identity rather than dealing with healing the mind of all these issues. And in the end, at 16 years old, she was put in a motel unit emergency accommodation on her own, and she died alone, starving to death. And it's just a tragic, tragic case. And the parents say that, they just didn't receive the help. The focus was on the gender affirmation rather than all the other comorbid disorders. Now, it's not the first time. There was this case about the transgender teen who tried to do their own mastectomy, which points also that this is actually a mental illness and we should be healing the mind, not cutting the body, as many professionals say. Unfortunately, activists David Farrier, who pretends to be a journalist, and an activist called Paul Thistle in Wellington have got hold of it and found a whole lot of commentary or posts made by the vulnerable teenager, the 14, 15, 16-year-old, that she put on a pro-anorexia chat group. So this is not actually the most healthiest chat group to be on. And she's basically, offloaded about how much she hates her parents. And David Farrier and Paul Thistle have felt that that's okay to breach her privacy because she's no longer alive to actually say whether she approves of it or not, which is a major ethical issue to me. And they've published some of this and have basically said it's the parents' fault. The parents have responded. They put out a media release saying, "It's with deep sadness that we, as the parents of the girls, speak out against the sensationalised portrayal of our daughter's life and death in a recent article by David Farrier." This is a David Farrier who went after a number of Christian organisations, including Bethlehem College, of course. "We are heartbroken by the story that has been shared publicly and deeply disappointed by the way Mr. Farrier has weaponised our daughter's distress and struggles with complex mental illness." And they acknowledged there was tension and conflict. Now, Simon, just before I get you to comment on this, the reason that I back the parents totally on this is because recently I've interviewed a couple of detransitioners from New Zealand around the same age, a little bit older. I've also interviewed Chloe Cole from the United States, and you and I met Mel, can't remember the surname, from Australia. Similar situation, all women. And I've also spoken to parents of these vulnerable teenagers as well. The story of Vanessa is consistent. It's the same issue going on. So, yeah, what's your take on all of this? It's pretty tragic.
It's tragic, deeply upsetting. Anyone who's been a parent or a step-parent knows that teenage years are fraught, and if your kids don't like you, that's sort of normal. But I suppose, look, there's so many angles we could go down, but I find what these people like David and Paul are doing is actually quite creepy, quite dirty when you think about it. This is not their child. They don't know this person from a bar of soap. But they're actually happy to, use that death and the memory of this child to abuse the child's parents. And just before we came on, I saw on X that one of them's now going to try and take both the family, RNZ, to court, insisting that by using the wrong name, as they perceive it, is somehow
misgendering,
defaming, and it's just it's sick and creepy, and it's sick because they're abusing grieving parents, and it's creepy because what are these men? And by the way, they are men, just in case they're confused. I
hope they know that.
Why are they obsessing with a teenage anorexic girl who's dead? I mean, as I say, there's something just creepy about it. But kudos to the parents. This is my last thought before handing back to you, Bob. Is the parents are acting with amazing grace here. Again, they've lost their daughter. We can step back from all the politics and the ideology and just understand that they've lost their daughter. They've lost one of their children. Amazing grace that they are displaying, and courage, I should add too, to actually be speaking about this.
Yeah, well, I mean, Farrier and Thistle are simply pushing a gender ideology very strongly. There is no other way. It's got to be rammed down. I saw a comment from the father of the girl who said, "My daughter didn't die from a lack of gender affirmation. In other words, she didn't die from a lack of puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. She died from a basic need of not being able to eat and not having food, and died of starvation. And the worst thing is that the state enabled it by giving her an independent youth benefit, putting her in emergency accommodation, and she died alone. And she'd just turned 17. So we're talking about a 16-year-old who's in emergency accommodation on her own. What kind of country does that? Shocking.
Well, I think it's increasingly the problem with Western societies, like, and that obviously includes New Zealand, where there's actually a deliberate attempt to break not just the nuclear family,
Yep.
but to break children from their
Yep.
parents. And this is obviously at the absolute tragic end of things. But we can know of other dynamics in play where, again, parents are not to be informed about what the children's doing, that the schools are taking over, the teachers are taking over. It's a deliberate strategy, I'm sad to say. And
Yeah.
I suppose just the encouragement to parents is know your rights. And, to the extent we can, particularly in the teenage years, talking to the young ones, particularly in school, and understanding what is being taught from RSE to whatever, and then have the gumption and the courage where possible, get them out. Get them out of the clutches of the state.
Yep. And my word of advice is anything you read from David Farrier, use some discernment. That would be my plea. But it does lead into our next story, actually, and the government has come out with another plan. And it's around suicide prevention, which, of course, is very relevant to this whole area, because one of the sticks used against parents is if you don't go along with the gender affirmation, then your child is going to commit suicide. And I know this for a fact because a young detransitioner told me that in New Zealand, told me that that was the advice she was given. Say that you're suicidal and you'll get through the system quicker. It's shocking. But anyway, the National Minister on Mental Health, the Minister of Mental Health, who's a national government minister, is none other than Matt Ducey. So there's a few issues that we need to comment on here, but let's just listen to his announcement.
Over the next 5 years, the Suicide Prevention Office within the Ministry of Health will be working closely with both health and government agencies to implement 21 new health-led actions and 13 new cross-agency actions. This plan is supported by an existing suicide prevention investment of $20 million per year. And on top of that, I'm very happy to announce we're allocating an additional $16 million of current funding to improve access to mental health and suicide prevention supports through initiatives in the plan. So we know what we need to do. For the wider health and social care workforce, whether it be MSD, police, corrections, Veterans Affairs is in this plan, we want to upskill our workforce to know how to better support those in a time of distress.
Another plan, more money. Is it going to solve the problem?
No, not in a heartbeat. Sorry.
Sadly.
No, yeah, very sadly. I mean, we in New Zealand have tragic numbers at 600 and something young people have suicide a year. I think, and I'm happy to be corrected on this, actually quite predominantly young men, which is often not talked about. But
yeah, no,
we
it's more men than women. But if you look at attempts, it's more women than men. As I tell people, females are less successful at completing their suicide, which is good. But if males decide to do it, they will do it. Slight nuance there.
No, but look, you're much better at stats, as I keep saying, than I am. But it's just tragic. Every death is tragic. But I see this as no different trajectory from the previous government, because they're all focusing, in my opinion, Bob, in the wrong areas. I mean, talk about all these agencies. Well, la-di-da. No mention of parents, of family, community, churches, and no actual talk directly. I mean, obviously it was a clip of the young people themselves. So all the money in the world, all the plans, all the talk won't address actually the core issues. So again, very long way of me saying this is all ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. You're not going to see much change, because until we actually address things like family dynamics, supporting young people and actually giving them some hope and not confusing them. You know, all this gender ideology, all this modern progressivism is actually one of the key drivers, not the only, but one of the key drivers, where you end up with this terrible dissonance between the real world we live in and the fake world that these young ones are being told exists, such as, you know, I can change my sex. Causes massive dissonance psychologically, and is a driver. I just want to make that clear. It's a driver, it's not the driver. So no, this will make no difference, tragically.
617 deaths last year. That's across all age groups. But New Zealand, according to the latest OECD report by UNICEF, has the worst suicide rate for 18 to 24-year-olds, and also in the 11 to 19-year-old gap as well. And we lead, we lead by a gap. It's a disturbing graph that I show at the talks that I do, and it's just, it's just really worrying. It's not that suicide isn't an issue in many cultures. It's just that we are doing particularly bad. There's a group of young people that are doing particularly bad in this area. So it is really tragic. More money, don't think it's going to solve the problem. And of course, Matt Ducey doesn't talk about things like puberty blockers and suicide. And I haven't actually seen any of his comments around even social media and the effect of that on mental health. Did he make any comments about social media and protecting kids from, has he got on board with Jonathan Haidt? Perhaps we should send him Jonathan Haidt's presentation, but I don't know if he'd read it.
Probably not. I think he's got his particular view and avenue on things. I suspect he's found, well, not suspect, I know, I mean, the public can see it's not going so well as a minister. This has been a much harder nut to crack. It's not going well for him. The plan is, as I say, just more paper, more money. And actually, to be fair, part of it's only reprioritized. It's a lot of the things what government do. Oh, 16 million here. That's 16 million they took from somewhere else. So, it's confused. As I say, if you're going to still push for puberty blockers and support sex change for young ones, you are putting fake ideas into their mind which conflict with the real world, which creates dissonance and tension, and is one of, not the, but one of the drivers, which leads to these awful statistics.
Yeah. And I mean, look, you've still got the problem with mental health. I mean, 20 million to deal with the mental health issues that we've got. I mean, wasn't it the Labour government that put in $1 billion or something? It was some massive amount into the whole mental health area, and I don't think there's much to show for it. We've got a workforce problem. Mental health is still worsening, especially amongst young people. So maybe we need to get back to core issues of family support, parenting role, and strong values. But don't tell them that, because maybe they haven't thought of it. Anyway, look, we have got two sort of lighter topics, but I'm going to leave those till last. And let's just do the serious one next. And it's about the fact that there's a poll that was done by the Asia New Zealand Foundation, and they ask about the perceptions of our attitude to China, but they also ask about our perceptions towards the US, which is kind of interesting that they include the US. But anyway, apparently our perception of China being a threat rose from 28% of us think it's a threat at the end of last year to 40% this year. Maybe it's because of the Chinese naval exercises in the Tasman Sea and the partnership with the Cook Islands, which we'll come back to. And less people think of China as a friend. Although, as we speak, Simon, our Prime Minister is shaking hands with China as best buddies. It kind of like, can you separate out, I mean, you've been involved with foreign affairs for a long time. Can you separate out trade from human rights abuses, the fact that it's not actually that democratic of a country? Are we just supposed to turn a blind eye to all of that?
They would hope we would. I think that's certainly the angle that this government's going down. I doubt human rights will factor in much at all. Like, there probably will be one line in the ministers will often sit across from each other with literally written notes where they It's all predicted. Usually it's been pre-approved. They've shown it to each side. So there'll be mention of human rights, but probably not to the depth that someone like myself would like. There'll be almost no mention of the continuing foreign interference by China into New Zealand. It's, I mention that because some of our issues with China is not simply what they're doing to their own people, think the Tibetans, the Uyghurs, the Hong Kongers. It's what they're doing in our own country. You can't completely separate it from trade. And even though I'm a bit, I'm described as a China hawk, I think New Zealand still has to trade with China. But in doing that, we should also be freely trading our ideas. And so we should be calling out their human rights. We should be calling out Chinese excesses against the diaspora here in New Zealand. And then we should be standing up for our rights. And we don't. We just seem to roll over, Bob, and say, well, it's all too big and difficult. We'll just go after the money.
Now, and just to prove how loyal I am, Simon, I was listening to this program called Solid Ground, hosted by Simon O'Connor this morning at 7:30, and you were talking about the free speech case involving a Chinese resident, or no, Chinese in New Zealand, wasn't it?
Yeah, Portia Mao. So she's a New Zealand Chinese, is a journalist, quite well respected actually, and I've worked with her for years. But long and short, she was calling out some CCP or Chinese Communist Party activities here in New Zealand, including the work of a young man called Morgan Zhao, who uses the handle Demon King. Long and short, he went to the court, got a court order to make her cease and desist talking about these things. So again, this is a journalist, and they used New Zealand's Harmful Digital Communications Act, so our own law, to silence her. She came to me. I said, well, first I said, I don't believe you, not in that harsh way. I said, that's no way a court could declare a judgment without talking to you, Portia, but turns out they can.
Wow.
But fortunately, I put her on to the Free Speech Union, and they're amazing, as is, of course, Family First, but put her on to Free Speech Union in this case, and they appealed successfully. But this is foreign interference in New Zealand, happening in this case against a good person and a journalist. It also shows that the CCP knows our laws exceptionally well. So again, it's not about walking up to Xi Jinping and punching him in the face, verbally or physically, but New Zealand should also stand its ground. We're very inconsistent. This is sort of a final thought for handing it back to you, Bob, is we talk a big game about human rights, and we'll pick on certain countries. We'll ban, Israeli ministers coming here and poo-poo other regimes. Xi Jinping, the president of China, is an autocrat who's crushed democracy in Hong Kong, who is responsible for concentration camps for Muslim Uyghurs. What he does in Tibet is horrific. And here is Luxon smiling away, shaking hands. I mean, John Key was as bad. So was Helen Clark. It's just the whole lot of them. I mean, this guy here is not a good person.
No. Well, you've actually got ex-prime ministers like also Don Brash, not Prime Minister, Don Brash, and also, who was the other one that signed the letter?
Jeffrey Palmer.
Yeah. And was it Jim Bolger as well?
No, which I was pleased to see not. Okay. And again, they just want us to turn a complete blind eye to the foreign interference in New Zealand and the human rights abuses. By the way, Bob, these are the same people, and it includes this current government, who their core argument is there's no point in raising the human rights issues because we have no impact. At the same time, they say, New Zealand has no impact on climate change. We're so small. But hey, we're still going to tax you to do these sort of, big moral statements. So it's completely inconsistent. Yeah.
Okay. Now, as part of this, as I said, as part of this survey, they also asked about whether US are friends. 33% at the end of last year, down to an all-time low of 21%. Of course, it's all Trump, apparently, but actually in November, it was Biden, the US. It was just the election. So it's always been pretty low. I've been surprised, trust in the US. I also noted, though, that there was a rise in the number of New Zealanders regarding fake news and misinformation as highly concerning, rose 7% to 53%. So maybe these people who have a problem with the US need to stop trusting the media coverage in New Zealand because it seems like it's just the media. See, the media coverage, that was the argument about the Chinese attitude to China as well. It was the media coverage around the Cook Islands, etc. So it was the media coverage driving our perception rather than the reality. Would you agree with that?
I think it's a mixture of both with China. I think there's empirical real evidence of what they are doing. And I think most people are picking up on that. When democracy advocates, even a Catholic cardinal has been arrested in Hong Kong and put in prison, these are demonstrable empirical pieces of evidence. But there is the perception. The Chinese warship coming through the Tasman, I think did wake up a lot of New Zealanders and go, oh, the American one, I think, slightly different. I think it is sort of a diet of anti-Trump and actually just sort of an anti-Americanism that comes through. It drives a lot of Helen Clark's commentary, I would argue. America's an amazing place, and the corollary or the flip side is New Zealanders love to visit America, and we love Americans. When you hear the American accent here, we want to talk to them, we want to engage. So separate Trump out. I think we still do like and trust America.
Yeah, okay. I wouldn't call it a diet. I'd call it a smorgasbord, and that's all they can talk about, which is kind of interesting. But that does just connect with the announcement that was made this morning, where Foreign Minister Winston Peters says, look, China is dabbling too much in the Cook Islands and has sent basically we're pausing our funding. How much do we give? I think I saw the figure, 194 million to the Cook Islands over the last 3 years, but they're pausing it. And they're saying that the way that the Cook Islands are dealing with the Chinese illustrates a gap in understanding between the Cook Islands and New Zealand government and the special relationship. This is a disturbing development. Funny thing is, Simon, I was in the Cook Islands the week that the Chinese representatives were there, were doing some of their bartering. If I'd known, I would have turned up because there would have been a good feed on offer. But look, should we be concerned about the Chinese, not only in the Cook Islands, but other Pacific nations as well, like Tonga?
Oh, look, absolutely. I mean, there's always going to be great power competitions, and, the argument could be made the UK and France and America. There's a whole lot of people who compete for interest. But they're a very different moral quality. I always get quite frustrated when people conflate that sort of argument. At the end of the day, China is ruled by an authoritarian communist regime that wants to impart its views around the world. The big conundrum for New Zealand is that we just cannot compete with them financially. And unfortunately, a lot of these countries that are desperate for money, and to a degree in some of the islands, there's an element of corruption. And so China's able to leverage off that. So not only are they giving millions to build a new police station or a stadium, but they'll rebuild the Premier's house, or the Minister of Finance will get a new car. New Zealand, Australia will never do that. So it's a very difficult playing field. I think Winston's caught between a rock and a hard place. Naturally, there's an element of saying, well, okay, Cooks, if you're going, as in the Cook Islands, if you're going to play and bring China into the same sandpit as us, we're not playing, we're not giving you money. Sounds the great, nice thing to do, or a way to be strong and robust. But of course, China says, oh, that's fine. Here, Cook Islands, we'll give you 300 million now, more. We'll fill that gap and just draw you ever more closer to us. So New Zealand's got quite a challenge, and part of the solution is actually more engagement, more exchanges. So it's not just a monetary thing. We should be sending more people to the Cooks. We should be bringing, young Cook Islands down here to study and to understand that the Western way of life is far more superior than the autocratic world that China is bringing.
All right, two to go. These are slightly lighter. Radio New Zealand had a heat wave. They did a story where they claimed that Hamilton had a heat wave at the beginning of this year, and that it shattered records, shattered them. But the problem was, Nick Minute, our good friend Ian Wishart, reminded them that actually in 1930, the temperature was higher, 2 degrees. And so Radio New Zealand quietly changed the headline, but because a lot of Radio New Zealand, TV1 News and the New Zealand Herald, they do a lot of syndicating where they're basically just reprinting each other's stories, which makes you wonder, should we be bailing them all out independently if they're just sharing the same stuff. But anyway, Radio New Zealand quietly changed it, as we've seen them do on some other issues, and they didn't inform TVNZ or the New Zealand Herald. So basically they've still got the incorrect data up. The Media Council said, look, it's exaggeration and a lack of disclosure. And Radio New Zealand actually were told about this and they dismissed them based on a claim contradicted by NIWA's own disclaimers. So, look, it's a bit of a concern. Good old Ian Wishart for calling them out and getting the decision, but it just suggests that the basic what do they say? Dotting the I's and crossing the T's is not being done by media. I actually did an interview. I saw an interview with one of my favourite journalists in the Herald, Simon Collins, who retired about 10 years ago. But he was a social issues reporter, so I had a lot to do with him, and he was always coming for my opinion. He probably wasn't on my side on a lot of them, but I really respected the fact that in those days he was very thorough, got both sides. But he admitted that the urgency of clickbait and getting stories out quickly and trying to get the clickbait by being dramatic means that, shattered records, heatwave in Hamilton, we're all going to burn and go to hell. That's a great story, but they're not doing their basic homework, and so destroys the trust.
Oh, it certainly does. I think Simon's right. I've talked to, strange enough, other journalists, particularly in my parliamentary days, very much a much more fast-paced dynamic now. And as you also noted, and Simon, as in Collins noted, you need more sensational headlines. The days of writing for the Evening Post, so you had all day to ponder and consider, are gone. You've got to be the first, whether you're RNZ or Newsroom or TV1, you're trying to quickly get things on X and up onto the website. So there's that. Secondly, you're right, there's a lack of rigor, and that's probably partly explained by the first part. They're not doing the depth of research. The third point, though, I would say, particularly around certain issues, such as climate change, they do have a bias or a narrative they want to push. And so I suppose I'm suggesting here, and I just want to put that word suggesting underline, that they actually do want to not quite falsify, but mislead. It's convenient to chop up the data in a certain way, be that NIWA initially or the media. So they've got an agenda. But I suppose what it really does tell us, and for everyone watching, and we already know it, but we've just got to interrogate data ourselves. When you see a sensational headline and a claim, we all have to just step back and go, okay, and I know it's tiring and it takes time, but to go, where's the data coming from? What data set are they using? Oh, it's only the last couple of years, not the last couple of centuries. So we've really got to dig in, and you do that really well, Bob. I know you're very good on numbers and stats and polls. You've just got to literally lift the hood and have a good look under.
Yeah. Okay, final topic before we get into the long weekend. They have found us. There is a new course specifically talking about Simon O'Connor, and it's this one, Unmasking Theocracy, Project 2025 and the Christian Nationalist Agenda. And it's run by Dark Times Academy. Dark Times, very dark times, which is your good friend, this guy, Byron C. Clark. Now, I've actually masked that shirt to stop it being offensive, but yes, that's one of his key photos. And just before you tell us a little bit about what you know about Byron Clark and why he's so fascinated with us, here's one of the weeks of their 8-week course. Christian Purity Culture and the War on Bodies. And just note down the end of the third line, we will delve into the anti-abortion movement, which is a defining part of Christian nationalism, and we'll also explore how Christian nationalist ideas about purity and pollution define sex, sexuality, gender, and ethnicity, which bodies are pure and which threaten the nation with pollution. Have you ever talked about pollution, Simon?
No, not in this context. I mean, look, this is basically someone who's got very crazy. I think you can objectively say he's actually described himself as very far left.
Yes.
Probably quite communistic. I don't know the man well. He's just sort of passed my radar a few times. Who's trying to wrap up his own prejudices. I think he popped up during the COVID times as one of these sort of
Yep.
disinformation experts. I actually think he's got no academic background. I mean, that doesn't make someone smart either. The disinformation project itself had academics, and they were completely barking mad. But he just is being fettered by the media, obsessed with these issues. He's also obsessed around climate change. He's run programs on that, and he's very aggressive in attacking anyone who he dislikes. But I'm just amazed that, well, Christian nationalism really isn't an issue here in New Zealand. I would debate whether it's even in America, but an 8-week course, I mean, honestly, I couldn't think of anything worse.
Well, and also Project 2025 is basically similar policies that we would affirm, which is strengthening marriage and families, less government, more religious freedom. And so, they make Project 2025 as the bogeyman. He was also involved with that centre that was set up by Jacinda to tackle white supremacy and extremism. Remember that one? And it was shut down by the current government because it was run by a white supremacist extremist, Dr. Joanna Kidman, who had some grotesque messaging on X that we uncovered. But this guy, Byron Clark, was also part of that as well. So it's kind of, they gather together, don't they? Disinformation, misinformation, white supremacy, Christian nationalism. As I said in my blog on this, it's not a cooking course, it's a cooker course. And Rachel, our visual person, did a very good little image for us of this course. So, we probably shouldn't be surprised. We'll probably see more of this, won't we?
We will. I mean, it's something which the left are particularly, the progressive left are particularly good at. I mean, you just mentioned some of the names there, and this guy, they're not to be uncharitable, but they're nobodies. But they somehow finagle themselves into media and into some of the political class and end up setting up these groups which then attract taxpayer funding, which sort of gives them a legitimacy. So, to their credit, at one level, they're quite good at creating, work for themselves, but based on ridiculous premises, which, by the way, are imported. Chloe Swarbuck and friends are always about imported culture wars.
Oh, shocking.
They're bringing everything in through that sort of course. But it's also, again, who are these people? Where's their academic background and anything that gives them any license other than basically they're giving themselves a platform for their own prejudices?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, that's our list. Fantastic. Great job. We can get a long weekend now, Simon. And will you be back to join us next Thursday, do you think? Do you think we can both make it back at the same time?
I think we can, and I'll be back on Tuesday morning with Solid Ground. I think you've got Straight Talk on Monday.
Straight Talk on Monday night, and also Daybreak Monday morning, because tomorrow morning having a bit of a sleep-in because public holiday. So there we go. No Daybreak, so don't check for it. It won't be there, but back on Monday morning. All right, have a great weekend, Simon, and thank you everybody for watching, and we will see you next week.